which at the same time as the beauty of nature and humanitarian values have imposed upon us certain negative restrictions as an inhibiting factor in the development of our agglomerations. The Byzantine age left us with a similar heritage in our country, and it is in the technique of that age that merged the two branches of Greek civilization, the Ionian branch from Asia and the European branch. There was also a long period, a dark age, as it were, of foreign occupation of the country. Thus, in the course of the period during which Europe was going through a normal historic evolution in the realm of settlements, and while it was moving towards the democratic renaissance and was succumbing to the influence of technology, social and financial technology, as well as scientific organization, our agglomerations were of a particular character. The people is striving to maintain its national identity and its human existence. Independent agglomerations were thus set up, either in isolated islands or on the inaccessible slopes of the mountains of our country, where they were organizing their political life, religious and social affairs. At the same time, a revolution was going on, which would eventually lead to their national independence. In the course of the 150 years which followed, during which in European countries a normal kind of evolution was going on towards humanitarian urbanism and subsequently towards rational industrial urbanism, Greece was undergoing successive national adventures, and its geographical space was gradually taking shape. The consequence of this was that a policy with regard to human settlements at the national level was never worked out. Positive or negative measures were taken successively and, above all, sporadically. Very often, these problems were connected with military catastrophes, natural catastrophes, the arrival of refugees, or indeed connected with the sudden and disproportionate development of a given center of activity. Today, after a critical phase in our history, the state, for the first time, is considering, as indeed is considering other grave national problems, is considering in an integrated fashion the problem of human settlements in all its stages. The beginnings of this activity and their fundamental institutional framework are constituted by two articles relating to the new constitution of our country. One dealing with housing, which makes it a state obligation. Another concerning territorial development, the protection of the natural environment, the cultural environment, green belts, forests, land use, ownership of land, and the protection of traditional agglomerations, etc. These two articles constituted the basis for rational development and the human development of the housing area. Following the new constitution, the first step was the bill which was passed only a few days later, a few days before, concerning development of the territory and protection of the environment. The second step was the bill tabled also a few days before, concerning the creation of an autonomous housing institution for low-income families, namely the enterprise of public utility for urbanism, housing, and shelter, known as KEPOS, whereby the state will consider jointly, firstly, the problem of the expansion of agglomerations and the urban infrastructure. Second, the problem of housing low-income families. C, problem of the improvement and renovation of regions of arbitrary construction. The phenomenon of arbitrary or uncontrolled construction was then studied on a humanitarian basis, and it was recognized for the first time that it wasn't a question of depressed areas, what we call slums, but rather a matter of construction carried out without permission, without financial assistance, and in disregard of town plans. And it was also recognized that this satisfied housing needs of a large proportion of the population, low-income population, after the war. These findings constituted fertile elements for the rational solution of the problem of housing in general, and that of uncontrolled building in particular, and laid down a way of dealing with the situation with positive and progressive measures. This activity coincided with the announcement and preparation of our conference. And it's a matter of satisfaction for us that we have a chance of resolving in a humanitarian way a major national problem, which is this study, a subject of study at the international level now.
Κύριε Πρόεδρε,
This relates to our national activities situated within the same humanistic contexts.
Greece, a country whose slender continental body is flanked by two archipelagos, a country open on three sides to the Mediterranean Sea. In the long course of history, island settlements were created out of the needs of daily life and under the particular economic and social conditions developed in the space of 4,000 years. A basic principle has governed every single structure from ancient times to the present day: its adjustment to the natural environment. Thus, a harmony is achieved between the man-made and the natural environment, not by altering the landscape, but by supplementing it. Aegean island settlements such as Patmos, Mesta and Pyrgi on Chios, Molivos on Lesbos and Lindos on Rhodes constitute an important part of the nation's cultural heritage. The state has set as a goal to take the necessary measures to preserve these settlements and to preserve them not as museum exhibits, but as live beings where people live and make their living and where everyday needs change with the evolving pattern of life. This film presents the various measures taken by the state in order to protect these settlements, along with the contributions made to this effort by private initiative. Because only with the participation of the people can we achieve our goal to protect our architectural heritage as a part of our national heritage.
Αυτά ως προς την εθνική μας οικιστική δραστηριότητα, τοποθετημένη μέσα στα ίδια ανθρωπιστικά πλαίσια. Ως προς το ευρύτερο όμως παγκόσμιο πρόβλημα των...
This is a matter of concern to our national activity seen within the same humanistic frameworks. But with regard to the problem of human settlements in general, I would observe that it presents the same characteristics as humane world life throughout the globe. It has two aspects which require solution: the establishment of life within humane material frameworks, secondly, the establishment of human life within moral and emotional frameworks. As to the first, it is certain that the modern realistic concept of life will provide solutions, and human requirements will find satisfaction in disproportionate technology. But with regard to the second aspect, the same over-technology, as well as the cruel super-scientific rationalism with its material contributions, will constitute the most difficult obstacle to overcome. This because this unilateral rationalism, which has hitherto prevailed, will tend towards the disappearance of the human sensibility of our time, the existence of which is an essential condition of humanity. It's for this reason that its absence will be the greatest obstacle to the solution of the problem of human settlements. Let us hope that inhuman phenomena, international in kind, that although they will continue without end, our peacemaking efforts will prove fruitful, and that we will not be haunted by the nightmare which Cropius formulated prophetically in 1932 on the occasion of another important historical international meeting, that of the Charter of Athens. The question was asked: the artist, the poet, the visionary, the sensitive man in general, will he become an alien creature ignored by the mechanistic cerebral man of our time?
να καταντήσουν παραμερισμένο πλάσμα του μηχανοεγκεφαλικού ανθρώπου.
Under-Secretary of State, Ministry of Public Works of Greece. Under Rule 54, I invite the Deputy Secretary General of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, Mr. Gerard Elder.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. My pleasure in taking the floor today is commensurate with the distinction of the delegates gathered together here and the quality and warmth of the hospitality from our Canadian friends and the importance of the subject of the conference. In 1972, the Stockholm Conference highlighted the threat which uncontrolled economic growth might pose to the natural environment. In 1976, the Vancouver Conference will shed light in form of constructive dialogue on the nature of the links between economic and social development and human settlement policy. I shall principally this morning talk about the problems of urbanization.
Membres de l'OCDE.
Most of the members of OECD have already had to deal with the urban revolution, that is, the brusque, rapid, and often painful increase of urban populations. They have thus accumulated within the realm of urbanization considerable experience, from which I'd like to draw some conclusions before considering whether this experience can be useful to developing countries and how. One first conclusion to be drawn from the experience of developed countries is that the phenomenon of urbanization is inseparable from the process of industrialization and growth. Economic growth is carried on from the primary sector and continues towards industry and services. Demographic growth and the relative low level of agricultural incomes encourages workers to leave the countryside, while industrialization attracts them to towns. Growth engenders urbanization, but reciprocally, the influx of workers into towns is a factor for growth. The gathering of men in towns creates these vast markets of ideas, jobs, and products, which make possible industrialization and increase in productivity, and hence a raising of the standards of living. Developed countries have also learned what it lies on the other side of that medal. They know now that the concentration of men and activities makes necessary costly investments and services, and that they disrupt traditional solidarities, create pollution of all kinds, and that beyond certain limits, the social costs may very well exceed the benefits of urbanization. The industrialized countries are striving, therefore, to control and guide this process, to introduce a new balance into the relative development of urban and rural zones, and more generally to influence the location of men and activities throughout the national territory. This is the object of regional policy and land planning, something to which OECD recently devoted some important work.
Des villes elles-mêmes.
With regard to the towns themselves, and I believe this is a second lesson we can learn, public action is no less necessary. A space policy is indispensable because space is political. It's not a consumable or a factor of production like any other, because space is limited, but because space creates social relations. The members of OECD are profoundly convinced of the effectiveness of the market as an instrument for allocating resources. But they're also aware that with regard to human settlements, market mechanisms may not suffice, and that they have to be controlled, adjusted, and supplemented. But urban policies are difficult to define and implement. Within this area, industrialized countries have to encounter three kinds of problem: renovation and rehabilitation of existing towns, sometimes threatened by explosions or implosions, the development of new urban space, and the management of growingly vast and complex agglomerations. Some of these problems have been studied in OECD by those responsible for policies of urban development and town management. For example, we have in our program cheap ways of improving urban environments, something which is the subject of a capsule presented to this conference, the possibility of defining and utilizing a system of urban indicators. This is contained within a broader program devoted to social indicators. The importance of reducing traffic in vast agglomerations, the essential role which can be played by the establishment and management of public land within towns. On each of these subjects and many others relating to the public policy of urban environment, the members of OECD have collaborated successfully and are ready to share their experience with other countries. But the question I would like to ask here is the following: can this experience be transferred to developing countries, and how? Even if they are taken overall less urbanized than industrialized countries, developing countries have also towns, sometimes even very large towns, to deal with. These towns are in a phase of rapid growth and pose economic and social problems of unprecedented scope. The experience of industrialized countries may be useful here, but provided that it is both translated and transmitted. It must be translated, first of all. The situation faced by developing countries differs indeed considerably from that familiar to industrialized countries, and even from that familiar to them in the past. In most developing countries, the problem of rural development is as pressing as that of urban development. And the problems which arise in cities which are rapidly expanding are of a scope and gravity unknown in developed countries. The mere transposition of solutions and methods used in industrialized countries should not be considered, therefore. Of course, it may be suggested that developing countries would be well advised not to commit some of the mistakes committed formerly by industrialized countries. Since that has been said, we must not give free rein to private speculation which generates injustice and irrationality, nor should we accept excessive density in the heart of towns which creates high social costs, nor should we rely on modes of construction which will subsequently lead to a waste of energy or rare primary commodities. But generally speaking, all transpositions of experience from industrialized countries should take account of the specific features of developing countries with regard to social and economic structures and the location of space, the use of space, and ecological and climatic conditions. It is for the developing countries themselves to define their own models for the development of human establishments, which is inseparable from a development model.
Faire preuve de courage.
They will often have to display courage and imagination to rid themselves of intellectual constraints, which are just as weighty sometimes as political and economic constraints, and to find, between the routine of ancestral traditions and the apparent attraction of imported models, paths to the future. If the experience of industrialized countries in this matter is to be adapted, I think nevertheless that it can be transmitted. OECD can help developing countries, if they so wish, to benefit from its own experience. I should mention here the fact that OECD is committed on its own account in this work. All OECD countries, in fact, have not achieved the same level of economic development, and the organization, for a long time now, has been working on a program of technical cooperation which has the purpose of transmitting to the less industrialized member countries the experience of the most advanced countries. This program has an important urban element and is based upon original methods. You'll find the details of this in the written text of my statement. It's also as donors that the member countries of OECD have also an interest in the transfer of the experience of human settlements, because this is inseparable from the problem of poverty in the world. Aid for improving living conditions has been used more hitherto to the profit of countryside rather than towns. For many countries, developing countries, in fact, it's rural underdevelopment, which combined with demographic growth is responsible for an urbanization which has just come about rather than been willed. I'd like to mention here the role of the Development Center of OECD, the function of which is promote research and organize the transfer of experience from member countries to developing countries. We engage in important activities also concerning building techniques, water projects, and various forms of urban and rural infrastructure in developing countries. Mr. President, it's by a happy chance that I take the floor after the delegate of Greece. Classical Greece, which has bequeathed to us the image of the antique city, has also taught us that man is the measure of all, of everything. The task of our time is to build the city of men in a way which matches the dimension of the world. This work will have no sense unless the techniques which are so necessary of the architect, the urbanist, the administrator, and the financier, of the economist and the engineer, are not considered as having their ends in themselves, but in the end responding to a more ultimate goal, which is that of the flowering of man in his dealings with other men. The construction of human settlements will be more harmonious and warmer, is hence, in essence, a work of peace. I would hope that the Vancouver Conference, displaying this pacific will meet the ambitious goals it has set itself. Thank you, sir.
I thank the Deputy Secretary General of the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development. I now give the floor to the Minister of Town Planning and Housing of Bolivia, His Excellency Rear Admiral Santiago Messi Roca.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, distinguished friends, the delegation of Bolivia is pleased to heed the call of the United Nations to participate at the World Habitat Conference in this hospitable city of Vancouver, where all the countries of the world are represented with the firm purpose of proposing recommendations and reaching agreements which will lead to the disappearance of inequalities among peoples and to raise the social standards of living of the most deprived peoples of the world. Before continuing with my statement, I wish to transmit to you the greetings of His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Bolivia, General Don Hugo Banzer Suarez. Capsule, please. The world faces a series of structural problems ranging from violence, the population explosion, the food shortage, unbalanced urban growth, to pollution of the environment. The crisis in itself is profound and the future of mankind is in danger. But at the same time that hunger, poverty, ill health are contemporary scourges, the world is becoming aware that these and other problems must be overcome in an effort of solidarity and cooperation among all peoples of the earth. Because today, when we speak of habitat, we wish to leave behind us the narrow, provincial vision and place ourselves within an international context. When Bolivia presented to the world the problem of it being geographically landlocked and the need for an outlet to the sea, we're speaking of fundamental factors for the improvement of our habitat. My country is aware that in order to improve the habitat of man, we must not overlook either general or specific problems. To this end, we firmly support the efforts of the United Nations, and our delegation is present in this international forum. The government and people of Bolivia wish the participants in the World Conference every success. Likewise, I appeal to the rulers and citizens of every country in the world to build a society based on genuine justice and devoted to the universal principles of peace and freedom. Thank you. It is the commitment of this conference to draw up clear and specific guidelines seeking a procedure for just and harmonious distribution which will guarantee a life of dignity for the present and future inhabitants of the planet by providing them with an adequate system of settlements suitable for their condition as human beings. It is our hope that when we return to a similar forum, we shall have an opportunity to establish a balance between what we have done for our peoples and international cooperation, so oft-times proclaimed here. My country has diagnosed the situation of human settlements and formulated guidelines for the strategy to be followed within the framework of the 5-year plan for economic and social development, which we shall apply as of this year, and of which I should like to give you a brief summary. Bolivia at present has a population of 5.5 million in a territory of more than 1 million square kilometers, and it is estimated that by the year 2000 we would have a population of about 10.5 million inhabitants. The rural-urban distribution is 65% of the Bolivian population lives in rural areas, and it is estimated that by the year 2000 there will be a parity percentage participation between the rural and urban sectors. As regards rural population, the main problem is inadequate distribution as compared with the natural resources. Since 43% of the rural population lives in the plateaus, at more than 4,000 meters above sea level, which has led to a subsistence agriculture with an average family income of about $200 per year, a scene which is in contrast with the widespread emptiness in the extensive tropical areas of my country. For this reason, we have undertaken a broad program of resettlement of the population, transferring human contingents from the highlands to the tropics with migratory programs intended to maintain an urban-rural balance and thus avoiding an uncontrolled and inadequate urbanization. We wish to rationalize the urban areas by creating a system of cities with proper priorities, with definite roles and functions, which will forestall the concentration of population in a few urban centers, thus bringing about the absence of people in intermediate and smaller settlements, and which will support and improve the rural-urban interrelationship, thus eliminating the typical duality between both areas. We also intend to bring together the scattered rural population, which will facilitate social contacts and make possible the supply of essential services, which will improve the quality of life in the rural areas. We are organizing the participation of the community to solve the problem of human settlements on the basis of the use of the traditional culture of the inhabitants of my country to collectively settle the problems which affect them. As regards housing, the basic social infrastructure and services, my country has shortages of shelter for 2/3 of our population. Despite the efforts we are making, we have come to the discouraging conclusion that to reasonably solve the deficits and the vegetative growth, we should use all our national resources, thus indefinitely postponing the goals for economic development and employment which we have set. And this proves the imperative need for a broad and unconditional approach of international cooperation to solve the problem of human settlements in the relatively less developed countries, without which the present shortages would increase rather than diminishing. Unless the developed countries establish an immediate, ambitious action to cooperate in solving the problem of human settlements in the relatively less developed countries, all that is said at this conference will not go beyond good intentions and courteous expressions which lead to nothing concrete. Unless present formulas for technical and financial assistance are transformed for the relatively less developed countries in adequate payment conditions, we will not be able to transform the socio-economic realities of our countries. Bolivia, as a relatively less developed country, and because of the manageable size of its population, as well as because of the opportunities for employment, for occupying vast empty areas, has favorable characteristics to start pilot projects for human settlements, both rural and urban, to be executed under international cooperation, which would serve as a practical model for other regions of the world. In conclusion, we trust that the decisions adopted at Vancouver will initiate a process of change with feelings of solidarity and justice among the countries of the world by seeking pragmatic solutions to the problems of habitat. Capsule, please.
Donde hace siglos
Where centuries ago Incas and Aymaras lived in the very heart of South America, Bolivia is located with 5,600,000 inhabitants over more than 1 million square kilometers of a geographically varied area. Bolivia, a singular geographical synthesis in the world with green fields, fertile valleys, fragrant dales, and majestic mountains. A land of contrasts, where history was made by two major civilizations whose Quechua and Aymara descendants prolong their glories in time. Here, where an empire once flourished, 82% of the inhabitants of Bolivia are now settled, for whom the tradition of their forefathers maintains their culture on the plateaus, and only 38% in the tropical lowlands. The Bolivian farmer must redouble his efforts to grasp resources and elements from the land for his incipient daily sustenance. The project pilot for Alto Beni and Yacapari emerged from the determination to contribute to the solution of several problems. Since January 1976, the program, depending on the National Settlement Institute, settled 5,000 families in 3 areas under a guided system, providing them with a lot of land with a respective title to the property, and providing them with a basic infrastructure, roads, schools, health centers, social agricultural centers, technical assistance, and credits, thus transforming their subsistence economy into a productive economy. With the project pilot, we succeeded in attaining better standards of life for the families settled as compared with the places where they had come from.
I thank the Minister of Town Planning and Housing of Bolivia. The next speaker is the representative of the Executive Director of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, Mr. A.J. Eisenstadt. I give him the floor.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, the United Nations Organization for Industrial Development, whose fundamental task encompasses a broad range of questions related with the process of industrialization of developing countries, has a particular interest in everything that relates to human settlements. Firstly, because in the world today, population distribution is responding increasingly to the requirements of human productivity, as is illustrated by the particular case of the creation of new human settlements as a consequence of the establishment of industrial centers. Secondly, because in fact, industry is playing a primary role in the establishment of human settlements, inasmuch as it provides building materials, methods, and new techniques, as well as manufacturing auxiliary elements necessary, including elements related to transport and all kinds of physical facilities necessitated by human activity. Thirdly, the activities of UNIDO are related with human settlements through the efforts which this organization is making in cooperation with the United Nations Environment Program in order to produce more effective and economic methods for minimizing industrial pollution, which thus makes for an optimum relationship between social costs and benefits in programs of industrial development. Furthermore, the activities of UNIDO, as provided for in the Declaration and the Plan of Action approved by the Second General Conference of UNIDO, held last year in Lima, also include the development of technologies appropriate for the exploitation of the natural resources of developing countries, both for primary and secondary industries. These activities are directly related with the problems of human settlements and the development of their infrastructure. Within the sector of building materials, the activities of UNIDO embrace assistance to developing countries in the establishment of industry producing cement, glass, tiles, clay, plaster and limestone materials, asbestos and plastics for building purposes. In the last year, more than 30 projects have been undertaken in this field. Furthermore, in countries which possess considerable wood resources, UNIDO has assisted in the commercial production of plywood and standardized products which are of importance for housing construction. Assistance has also been given in the construction of prefabricated houses and the production of furniture and accessories required for housing purposes. Due to economies of scale inherent in the production of cement, UNIDO, in an effort to establish technical and economic viability of a production on a scale commensurate with smaller markets, is assisting in the conduction of various experimental plants with a small capacity. Particular attention is thus being paid to the need for developing techniques for the production of building materials of low cost on the basis of locally available primary commodities. The assistance given by UNIDO to developing countries in the field of location of industry and the planning and construction of industrial estates has rapidly grown in recent years. In order to facilitate, to help countries with the formulation of their general policies with regard to the location of industrial plants, UNIDO has done a considerable amount of methodological work which makes available to member states the analytic tools and basic criteria and necessary information schemes for the study and specific determinations required in each particular case. In a historical sense, the evolution of human settlements has been determined by the orientation of economic and social development. Thus, to a large extent, the geography of human settlements derived from the needs of trade in connection with traditional routes and roads and relatively simple sources of energy, such as water, which humanity has always used since the earliest times. Modern technology makes possible greater freedom of choice in the location of human settlements because of the availability of transport and better diversification of sources of energy. There is therefore a relation of interdependence between the location of industry and the location of human settlements. To the extent that political policies of industrial development represent an important factor in the determination and location and distribution of population geographically, there's a considerable influence on the establishment of new human settlements and the development of those already existing. A greater degree of diversification and fluidity in sources of energy have also contributed to the increase in freedom of choice of sites most well adapted for human settlements, which makes it possible to site them in areas with a better climate and a better geographical situation, with a view not only to economic production, but also with a view to the preservation of the best possible environment. In the Declaration and Plan of Action approved in Lima, very important goals were laid down for the industrial development of developing countries for the next 25 years. The major objective was to see to it that developing countries by the year 2000 achieve at least the level of 20% of the industrial output of the world. In order to achieve this objective and the various regional goals, the developing countries will have to step up their industrial production at a very steep rate. According to calculations made on the basis of variable premises, the developing countries will have to increase 8 to 12-fold their industrial production in order to achieve this objective. There can be no doubt that a transformation of this scale will have a profound effect on the evolution of human settlements in developing countries. The accelerated and intensive process of industrialization, which is being contemplated to achieve the goals, will no doubt have a profound effect on the distribution of population in these countries and consequently on any action in the field of human settlements. And account must be taken very especially of the implications for human settlements. In conclusion, sir, I'd like to repeat here what the Executive Director of UNIDO said on previous occasions. The objective of development in all its aspects is human well-being. In each case, we have to look for the best ways of meeting human needs by the intelligent use of technology created by man and the abundant riches which nature has made available to us. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Executive Director of the United Nations United Nations Industrial Development. In light of the decision taken by the conference at its 6th plenary meeting under Rule 55 of the Rules of Procedure, I now give the floor to the representative of the World's Cities Cooperation Center, Mr. Juan Delgado Navarro, Vice President and Mayor of the City of Guadalajara, Mexico.
Señor Presidente,
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, in the daily reality lived in the settlements in any part of the world, there is a government entity which has a more direct responsibility for the entity, which has to be strengthened economically and politically. Some weeks ago, the mayors of the world's cities gathered in Milan from the 15th to the 17th of April 1976 at the initiative of the mayor of Milan, Mr. Ignasi. And we bring before you the Milan Declaration. The participants in the Conference of Mayors of the world's major cities gathered in Milan, 15 to 17 April 1976, at the initiative of the Center for Cooperation of the Cities of the World, the World Federation of Twin Cities, and the International Union of Local Authorities, after having heard the reports and statements, decided that it was their duty to inform the Habitat Conference in Vancouver of the following concerns, which affect all local governments. First, The powers of local authorities concerning the administration of everyday municipal services and the management of the local resources and revenues must be recognized without reservation by adequate legal measures. This delegation of authority is absolutely necessary in order to enable the population to participate in the choices concerning its future. Third, local authorities must have at their disposal financial resources in order to guarantee the services required by the people and which are essential to the development of the town. This implies an equitable distribution of the public resources between the higher levels and the local authority. Accordingly, it is necessary to grant the municipal authority the possibility of collecting taxes directly so as to secure them the revenues they need, which is the only fundamental basis for effective autonomy. Fourth, it is with deep regret that the conference must acknowledge that there are still some countries where people are oppressed for racial, religious, or political reasons and are thus deprived of their most elementary civil rights. Therefore, the local authorities must guarantee the security and integrity of their citizens and respect for their property. Within their possibilities, the local authorities must oppose any measure of discrimination on racial, religious, and arbitrary division of urban territories or any other grounds which in extreme cases might lead to the removal of groups of persons belonging to the Ormond community by measures depriving them of their rights, goods, or homes, or in any way an infringement of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Fifth, the local authority must work for the development of the town within the framework of its historical, traditional, and ecological values and improve the quality of life and oppose any attitude which might have a negative impact on these values. Six, the local authorities must guarantee an adequate mobility of persons in the town and the urban area, by facilitating the transportation,
para que estén al alcance de todos.
Providing public transit at reasonable prices. Seventh, the local authority must make sure that in cities, social and economic balance is maintained by making acceptable living conditions available to all classes of the population, regardless of age or income level. Eighth, the participants in the Conference of Milan take the opportunity of this declaration to stress once more that all the efforts carried out to improve the living conditions of citizens would remain without effect unless governments live up to declarations to which they have subscribed concerning the preservation of peace and the solution of conflicts by means of negotiation. Effective application of peaceful cooperation would make it possible to finance urban development and consequently contribute to the well-being of citizens with the considerable sums now expended on military budgets. Ninth, the Conference of Mayors has recognized the situation of deprivation of many local authorities in the developing countries, and therefore their inability to achieve progress. The solidarity that must characterize relations between local authorities all over the world should lead governments of the industrialized countries to undertake concrete action so as to bring to the deprived local authorities the means to enable them to offer their inhabitants better living conditions. With a view to making relations between local authorities and the United Nations more effective, the Milan Conference deems it necessary to recommend that A, within the central UN organ dealing with human settlement issues, a local government department should be created which would A. Strengthen and support local and regional government functions in the field of human settlements. Secondly, ensure coordination with United Nations departments dealing with the public administration and finance, community development, transport, social work, and regional development. Thirdly, set up a committee of contact with international local government associations to represent them in the various United Nations departments which deal with the specific problems of human settlements and relations with local and regional governments. Mr. President, since a large part of mankind lives in cities, they must be given more resources, more freedom, and more justice. Cities have always played a major role in the history of the world and therefore must be supported by the United Nations in an effort of direct cooperation in a spirit of brotherhood. Distinguished delegates, I believe that the foregoing purposes cannot be fully implemented if we avoid what is essential in our times, to realize that the problem of human settlements must be viewed in a global perspective to make it possible to lessen the enormous gaps which daily divides the haves from the have-nots. There is international injustice in this. To counteract it, it is imperative to arrive at a new international economic order by applying the principles of the Charter on the Economic Rights and Duties of States, which was adopted by the United Nations. We're grateful to the Secretary General of Habitat, Dr. Enrique Peñalosa, for the opportunity he has given us to state on behalf of all the mayors of the world the Milan Declaration. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the World Cities Cooperation Center. The representative of Saudi Arabia has requested to exercise the right of reply. I call on the representative of Saudi Arabia.
In the name of the Almighty, the Most Merciful, Mr. President, fellow colleagues, thank you for giving me the floor once again. Mr. President, every delegation has the right to express its opinion, and that freely. And I hope that you'll allow me to express on behalf of all the Arab delegations our deep gratitude to the friendly delegations from Africa, Asia, Europe, and Latin America who have expressed once more their full solidarity with the just cause of our people by abstaining from hearing the statement delivered by the head of the delegation that represents the continuous aggression against United Nations Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. God bless you, and thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. This meeting is now adjourned.